Hi class, this is JilMac. I'm the instructor for the Community College of Vermont and the Windham Regional Career Center. Today we're talking about HTML and making web pages. And we're using a text, and the students know if they have any questions about this, they can give me a call and we can work one-on-one. Now, this chapter that we're going to be going over today is Chapter 9. And Chapter 9 is talking about defining selectors. And really what that means is that we have a whole bunch of HTML and we're starting to connect what's in the HTML with the CSS. And how do we do that? So that's what we're looking at in this chapter. So we're gonna read the book and we're going to go and look at the book and run the book. So we're going to be going into, so this is our textbooks website, so that you can read the textbook and have your phone beside you or your tablet or your computer to be reading what the code is and seeing what it physically does. So we're doing Chapter 5. Now in Chapter 5, we're starting out with it's not Chapter 5, it's Chapter 9. I'm looking at it going, no, Chapter 9. So we're looking at Chapter 9, and at first we're selecting by the element name in the HTML, and we're connecting it to the name in CSS. So let's look at this code and see what it does. Okay. In order to really look at it, we can bring in our code, and this is what it looks like. I've downloaded this to my computer, and so we're looking for the file select by an element name. So select by an element name. So it's this right here. I'm going to open this up in Notepad++. So here's our Notepad++, select by element name, and we have the header, which is telling us what the title is. That's what our tab is going to say. And then we are also linking to a style sheet, and that style sheet is going to be found in the CSS directory under name.css. So let's look for that. Here is the CSS directory, and the name of it is going to be name. So it's this one right here, and we're going to also open with, and I'm going to be using the Notepad++ editor. Okay. So here we have the CSS, and here we have the HTML. The HTML, in it, once we start the body, we have articles. And the articles that we have are, this first article is going to have a class of architect. And the class of architect, if you go into the CSS, we're not even using that yet. All we're using in this CSS is the font and the font color. So that's all we're grabbing with select by element name. So every time we have a color, an H2, H2s we're going to make red. If it's not an H2, it's not going to be red. So let's go back into this and look at it side by side. This is an H1, so Antony is not red. A P is just a P, it's not an H1 or an H2, so that's not red. This next paragraph, Barcelona, is not red. And then all of a sudden we have, we have an H2. That's a heading 2. And the heading 2, anything that is in between the H2 open and the H2 close is going to be red. This paragraph isn't an H2. Here we have another H2. La Sangrada. That is going to be in red. And it's in red because our CSS says anything that's an H2 is going to be in red, and we see that that's true. So that is what we call an element by name. We're selecting it by the name, and we're calling it H2. We're giving it this whole font. It's using the same font throughout for sans serif 1.3 size. Except if it's an H2 is going to have a bigger font because it's a heading. It's kind of built in what percentage size it is. So that's what we're seeing in the first example. Then in the second example, in our second example, let's look at the book so we can get that file name. The second example is select by class. So when we look at this select by class, and we go into our code, select by class. Okay, we're starting again. So here we have Chapter 9, and we're looking at the file select by class. So I go down to select by class, and I'm going to open that in my editor. Here we have a class of architect. Now when we look at the CSS that's associated with that, CSS class.css, and let's open that. So we want to go into CSS, and then we want to go to we want to look at the class. We see that the class is architect. And here we have a class of dot architect. So here we're selecting by class. We're saying our class is architect, and in our class CSS, this is how we tie it in, architect. And every time the class is equal to architect, it's going to be red in color. So let's look at it. So our H1 is red because everything in this class for this whole article is architect. So we have H1, many tourists, then Barcelona. Now the AHREF, the hypertext reference, well, that's a little bit different. That's a link. But everything is in red except for this paragraph doesn't have a class. So when we look down, so this whole article here had a class of architect. When we get out of that article, we have this one paragraph that says this paragraph doesn't have a code of class architect. And so it isn't red. So that's the reason, and they had to put this code around it saying, this is code. We don't want you to call it a class. We're just stating it. Please don't consider it a class. And so that's why this looks like it. So here we're calling it by a class, and in this one we're just calling it by an element. That an element is a tag, and a class is where you're specifically saying class equals. You could also give it that. They're going to show you lots and lots of different examples. The one I want to look at is on page 208. No, 208. We already did 208. Is on page 220. And page 220, because each of them just kind of builds a little bit more. And here on page 220, we have selects links by state. And the state is when I scroll over something, that is a state. I'm either in a hover or I'm an on-click. Those are states. So let's look at our code for the state. Let's bring up our Notepad++, and what we want to do is we want to look at this file, select links by state. So we're going to say File, Open, and select links. Let's do it exactly. Select links by state. Select links by state right here. So I'm going to open that file. And when I open that file, it's telling me that my style sheet is going to be in the CSS directory, and it's links by state. So let's open that one. File, Open. We're going to go into the CSS directory, and it's going to be links by state. So this is our links by state, which is exactly the same as what's on page 220. So what is a state? A state is when we get to the AHREF, that's a hypertext reference, if we have linked to it, the color is going to be red. If we have visited it already, the color is going to be orange. If we've got it on focus, it's going to be purple. And if we hover over it, it's going to be green. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to reload this with an F5. And is that going to change the color? No. So I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to close my tabs. Then I'm going to go back in. I might even grab a different browser so we can see it. Maybe I'll grab. I'm just prepping and getting another browser up and running. And I will put this link back in and see. So when I hover over it, and I'm going to make this small so we can see it side by side, because there's only one link in this whole thing. Right now, I believe that it's a red color. When I hover over it, when I just move my cursor over it, and my cursor goes from a pointer to a finger, I'm hovering. And so that color is purple. If I were to click on it, the color is purple, but now it's blue. And if I open it and go back to it, now it's orange because I have already visited it. Okay? So the link color was red in the beginning. Let's Control F5 to reload it. Did that do it? Control F5? No. Let's bring up a new browser. And I'll just put that link in it. Okay. You can close the browser and open it up again. Okay, so the link is going to be red, and it is red. And if I focus on it, focus isn't an on click. I can't remember what focus is. I'll have to look on it. But once you click it, it was green, and now when we go back, it's purple because it's focused. That is where we are. So the focus is on purple because you can see all the little dots around it. And when I hover over it, it turns green. But once I unfocus it, it's going to turn orange because we already went there. So I'll just click over here. Now it's turned orange. If I click on it and come back to it, it's going to be focused. It's going to be the purple because it has little dots around it, means I've selected it until I take the focus off of it. So I'll just click on this 150. And now this is a site that we've already been to, so it's orange. And if you had a whole bunch of them, you'd want to know which ones have you clicked on and which ones haven't you. So that's what this page 220 is explaining, how you get this little teeny bit of code here, this link, what this AHREF means. That the A is, okay, we're giving this our attention, and it's a hypertext link. So when you get here, It's okay whenever there's an A, and if you link to it, or if you visit it, or if you focus on it, or if you hover over it, you're going to turn it different colors. Because that's how people, when they have a whole list of links, that's how they know what they've been to and what they haven't, or what they're cursored over. What are they on? What are they focused on? What has their cursor gone over? And that's how we tie together the HTML and a particular CSS. In this case, we're looking at this one. So that's chapter 9. And what I want to emphasize here is not that you have to memorize how to do all of this. How are you going to remember to do all of this? It's to expose you to this is how we tie together what's in an HTML file and what's in a CSS file. And so it's to familiarize yourself with that. You know, some of you are going to go on and you're going to be, you know, HTML programmers, and you're going to do a lot of stuff with it, and others may just be managing a project, or they may be in charge of testing to make sure that the website works correctly, or they may be a user of that website. And it's important to kind of know, where does this stuff come from? Just like when you're driving, you don't have to know everything about an engine, but you have to know, hey, sometimes you fill some vehicles with gas, and sometimes you fill some vehicles with diesel. And they have different nozzles on them, so you don't mix them up kind of too much. All of that. So kind of just breathe, just be aware. We are exposing you to this. You know, some of you may really eat this up and go for the coding aspect. Some of you may just say, well, it's nice I was aware, and then I know how to do these things. I'll change some colors and just make myself familiar with them. Because once you change them, then you have to go back and test them. Does it really change this color to something different? You know, you're always going to be on the end where you're testing somebody else's website. Just like when we're driving a car, we're testing all the roads. Every time you drive over it, you're testing. You know, is it slippery? Is it rocky? You know, did they pave it right? Or did, you know, we just get that big, huge pothole again that knocks my alignment out and wears my tires out incorrectly? All that kind of stuff is what you're being exposed to. So just keep breathing. I know it's new, but it's just how the web is built. You guys have a great week. Call me if you need me, and I'll see you in the next chapter.